go ahead.
Sounds great. And again, there's a chance if I can run into the greenhouse at the end and show you guys some things since I'm on site today. I'll switch from my computer to our phone so we can do a good walkthrough. But without further ado, I'll start my presentation here. A little bit about myself. You can see my history there. I'm unconventional in this industry, to say the least. I went to school for biogeography and was welcomed into the industry. Found a love for all things plants and greenhouse and the blend of science and hands-on activity that I got to do in controlled environment agriculture. I've grown in Illinois, I've grown in California, up and down the West Coast, and in Yuma, Arizona, and then on a roof in Brooklyn with Gotham Greens, which was an excellent experience, and now in North Texas. So several different biomes and environments, lots of different greenhouses, almost always leafy greens and herbs with some fruiting crop experience. I'm very interested in new products and new technology and collaboration within the industry. My experience has led me to form lots of opinions on different things within the industry and get comfortable with some types of media and lighting, but I do my best to challenge myself in an effort to promote new products and learn new things and not be too complacent. I want to start off by talking about the purpose of hydroponic media. Everyone has their own preference for hydroponic media. People have grown in different medias, albeit rock wool or peat moss or some of the things that we'll talk about here. But when we come down to it, the actual purpose of media in hydroponics is mostly to start and hold a place for our plant. At the very core of hydroponics, we're trying to avoid using soil or what people call dirt and supplement that with a media that is somewhat inert or beneficial, but doesn't use that biome that exists within soil. And in that sense, you can numb that down into very basic media that is completely inert and doesn't do anything but hold a place. And I see that as the root of the purpose. This media, very often when you get to fruition on some leafy greens and some herbs, or even things like chard, you often cannot even see the media at the end, depending on the size of media that you use. And the roots have totally taken over and it's very solid in the place that you've put it. And I think that is the real purpose of that media. How you choose your media after that depends on your specific needs, your system, and your comfort level. I firmly don't believe that there is a wrong media to use. I think that it is highly adaptable to your system, your comfort level, and what your goals are with your actual plants. I have been growing mostly with rock wool in my career, but I have used well over 20 different types of media in hydroponics and all the considerations that come along with that. So some of the characteristics we can look for in hydroponic media are listed here. They have varying levels of porosity. That porosity can be seen as for air or for water. So there's a water holding capacity, there's an air holding capacity or breathability. There are benefits to both of those, in my opinion. And again, it's going to depend on your crop and how you water and how often you want to water in your system that you're working in. If you have an ebb and flow or a mini NFT, or if you're simply just using tables and overhead watering or misting, all of these are going to change how your plants breathe and drink and how you make them breathe and drink. And you can use your media to guide your plants down a certain path. If you know these points about your media, it makes you a stronger and smarter grower and therefore better at what you're trying to do. And in essence, when you're starting with the media and propagation, the growth that you can achieve in 1 week, 2 weeks, or 3 weeks, or however long your propagation is, increases exponentially over the finishing time of that crop. And so the better product you pop out of crop, the better product you're going to have at the end. Considering aeration, plants need to breathe. They need oxygen, both in the root zone and around the root zone for nutrient uptake and metabolic processes. So you need to know how much air capacity a media has and how to work with that. There are certain medias that come with a fertilizer charge. This can be both good and bad. You just have to understand it so you know how to feed. It can also have implications on whether you're organic or not, along with the composition of the media. The volumetric water holding content is very important. Not only how much water that media can hold, but also how much you want it to dry back or how wet you want it to stay. And that will guide you down your watering events later on throughout propagation. Cation exchange capacity, if you are familiar with it, if you know the science behind it, obviously this is what allows plants to uptake nutrients by exchanging cations and or anions and bringing up those different nutrients that we put in to the system to feed the plant with. And this is going to basically vary highly among your different, not only the nutrients that you use, but the media that you're using to water and hold your plants. And then for the porosity, you're talking about larger particles. So the bigger the chips, the better you're going to aerate, but the less water you're going to hold. Think of putting large rocks in a bucket, essentially. The larger the rock, the more space between those rocks, which gives lots of room for air, but less room for water, and vice versa, going down to something like sand, where you're not getting a lot of breathability, but it may hold a lot of water with that size. And that there's a full spectrum of that among hydroponic media. And you need to consider that when you're growing so you know how you can water your plants. The types of media that we have worked with here that I can speak to are peat moss. We have many different types of peat moss products that we've used. We've narrowed it down to actually 2 that we really like, which I'll talk about a little later. Peat moss just comes from peat bogs. It is farmed in mind, so to speak. There are arguments around its sustainability, but for the most part, this is a very popular additive, not only in hydroponic growing, but also in some soil growing also. It can run a tad acidic. Typically, it'll come from Canada or Baltic areas, other areas of Europe. And it can be certified organic, which is a big plus for that media. Then we get to rockwool. Rockwool is one of the, if not the most widely used hydroponic media, at least in the United States right now. It is chemically inert, meaning that it only takes up what you put into it and it won't react with what you add to it. It has very good water holding capacity and very good breathability. It needs to be handled correctly in a sense that how you water really affects how that media is going to work for you. That is very true for rockwool in my experience, more than any of these other medias at all. The rockwool comes in many more different sizes than other medias do, and you can scale it up quite a bit, from a 1-inch cube or 36 millimeters to up to giant blocks that they'll grow finishing plants in, specifically cannabis plants. And then long grow slabs that they'll do tomatoes and cucumbers and vine crops in. It's highly adaptable, but it is something you need to learn how to use correctly. Cocoa coir is made from coconut husks. Typically comes from tropic regions. It's a use for coconut husks that did not exist before, so it actually has become quite an industry. Initially, there were problems with salinity content in coconut coir, where they were mining it, not flushing it. Now they have a pretty good handle on flushing it. It has some benefits for antimicrobial purposes, because coconuts will actually germinate in these husks in nature, and so it adds to a very good biome for that seed to germinate in. Just be careful of your source. Normally this comes compressed in blocks or chunks. At times it can be wrapped. It was a favorite for a long time, in my opinion, with a lot of people I spoke with, and also rivaled that of rockwool. But one of the issues with it was using it in a system with recirculating water, or where you had an ebb and flood NFT system, was it falling apart and getting into your system. And so there was kind of a call to have it be netted or wrapped. And there have been some products that have come out that way, and we actually used one of those. All in all, it's a very good media and can be certified organic. We recently used a product called jute made from plant fibers. You may have heard of it in rugs or carpeting. We got a product from the Netherlands called the Holland plug. It was hard to get, still not readily available in the United States. There's not a lot of data out there on it. It basically mimics rock wool in its texture and use, but it's organic and it comes from plants and it can be compostable, which are some of the biggest knocks against rock wool. And we did one trial with this media. Again, it was a little hard to get a hold of and get through customs and use. But we had success with it. We were impressed with it. It held true to rock wool standards. It dried out a little quicker. So we had to learn that. There's a bit of a curve there. The results were mixed, but promising if we learned a little bit more around that. I would say it would be an excellent replacement for rock wool if it would ever come to that, just due to the sustainability and compostability of rock wool. There's emulsified media, which is basically any of the number of things that we've mentioned, along with vermiculite, perlite, mostly peat moss, or even soil that is technically glued together. We used a product called iHort that did this. There's a lot of them out there. They basically can use a glue to allow all of your media to stay together and not fall apart. So the argument against Coco Core is then solved by being able to keep it together. Some of the issues there were the chemistry behind the glue or the emulsifier, whether or not it could be organic, whether or not it affected plant growth or whatever. We had very good success. It was almost like having a brownie looking plug of soil and peat moss at whatever blend we wanted. But in the end, we'll talk about it, it did not perform some of our other media, but it was a very nice additive. And I know there's some new options out there we haven't tried lately. And then you have loose medias that you can use if you want to pack your own, or put your own in your own case or pot or holder, however you want to do that. These can also be used as supplements. You can add vermiculite or perlite on top of any of these to cover your media, hold your seed in or hold the moisture in. There's been a big surge of wood products lately as they are sustainable and organic. Everything I've read about it, it's kind of mixed bag, where the wood comes from, whether the wood's organic, how it was grown, the different chemistries with the wood. It's definitely not inert. I think there's maybe a couple products that are almost like a compressed sawdust product, but I've never grown in that wood yet. I've seen plenty of research around it, but I would ask people to share that. That's something that I'm interested in, but haven't really dived into yet. Some things to take in consideration with media: size and shape. If you're using seeds, what type of seeds you're using to put into your media, as in pelleted or naked seeds, that will depend. All of these medias can change the size of the hole that you put them in, if they even come in a hole, or whether they can be dibbled with a seeder or a dibble board, how deep they are, and then whether that seed needs to be, how much moisture it needs to actually germinate, whether you can provide that moisture in that hole with that media as you water. Just some initial considerations for that. And then your germination needs, as far as temperature and the coverage, like I spoke of earlier, with having the coverage to keep light out. If you need a primed seed, specifically something like spinach, which we've learned to prime quite well, if you have to prime that seed, can you then plant it with a seeder, or does it have to be done by hand later on, depending on the media that you have? Or if you have the right type of media for your spinach seed or something that needs to be primed, will it help you actually prime it if you start it soon enough? So there's a lot of considerations there with the type of seeds and varieties. If you're using cuttings for any kind of propagation there, vegetative propagation, there's a lot of products out there by companies that do rock wool and peat and using net pots, pots, things like that, that you can either stick your cutting in, or they'll have a slit down the side that you can open up and slide your cutting in. It's very effective to use a lot of this media for cuttings. Obviously, there's a very big industry around it, specifically now driven by cannabis production and the need to clone plants successfully on a high volume. Again, you have to make your considerations the same as I spoke about above with all those aspects, but it's important to know that there are products out there that are designed specifically for cuttings, and that can be very helpful. Considering the shape, so function through form, we've used 3 or 4 different, actual shapes, from like a hexagon type shape to an inverted pyramid to the round to a square. They all can serve different purposes outside of just the way they fit into something. The availability of air and the tallness and the actual volume of the media, how they fit into your system, whether you're using pots or if you're transplanting, and then the available space you have. So if you could use, you'll see later, the volume plays a key part in how big those seedlings can grow in a given amount of time. But if everyone could grow in giant blocks in propagation, maybe you would, but you often don't have space for that. That's supposed to be a stepping stone, and you can't transplant with that. So finding that happy medium, that Goldilocks zone of size and shape and to purpose of what you're actually growing and how long it can be there, as you plan your crop schedule out, that plays a big role in considering that type of media. And then finally, if you want to automate seeding, which I think a lot of people would like to, it can be expensive, but it can be a major investment to save on labor. And we are actually in the process of doing that now, stepping up from a hybrid of automated and manual seeding to full automated industrial commercial seeding. It's hugely beneficial, but they're expensive, and you have to consider your media and whether the seeder you purchase can be wet with the media. Can it actually dibble for you? Does it need to be a needle seeder or a roller seeder? How fast you need it to be? What's your volume? There's so many considerations that can play into that media. And oftentimes when you buy a seeder, you need to share your media trays and send samples to that company as they design it for you. So I would highly recommend taking that into consideration. So our media trials at Eden Green. You can see some pictures here of our actual greenhouse and what we have out there. We have tested several different types of media over the 2 years that I've been here. The things that we have considered for this media, you can see in my slide here. This hovers around some arguments I've had with colleagues throughout my career that revolves around, do you want to water, how close can you water your propagation to how you're going to water it if you transplant it? And for something in like an NFT system, I've had a lot of discussions about if you're going to do more intervals and less watering and let your media dry out, let your root develop, how does that affect a plant when you move it to a system that is in circulating water, that's watered 24/7, because you've confused that plant a little bit. I've personally seen crops show deficiencies for several days at transplant because you changed the way you've watered them. So arugula comes to mind with a magnesium deficiency right after we planted it, because it went from this dry, arid environment in seeding, so to speak, and then we put it in an FT, which it grows very well in, but I may have lost 2 or 3 days of production because it had to adjust first and we aggravated it. And most of us all know how touchy plants can be, a lot like people, in my opinion. So, but you need to consider things like what you can and can't control. At Eden Green, we can control the temperature of our water, and that's a big deal because a lot of people can't. And if you're at the whim of municipal water, right now your water is very cold in a place like Texas, and it takes a while to warm up. In the summer, you can hardly get it cold if you're at a municipal water source, so it takes a while. We can control our water temperature so it's constantly at 65 to 68 degrees, and that has effects down the line also. If you can or can't, you may want to choose a media that may be able to help you that, or do some subheating if you can. And then you need to learn drastically like we did. We had to pick, how do we want to water? Do you want to water more often with less water, less often with more water? What type of dry back do you need if you want to dry back? How do you want to set up your system? And you have to take all those things into consideration before you get started, in my opinion, so you can design more effectively. We designed kind of after the fact at Eden Green. When I got here, we didn't have a propagation system. We were outsourcing our seedlings, which sounds ridiculous when I say that, but I changed that when I got here, and we built a vertical propagation system that hopefully I can show you later. That works very well, but it allows us to trial a lot and to try new things. And then your lighting and your timing and the type and its effects. So the media and lighting plays a big role. One of the things that we saw with our seeding and the methods that we use is if we use a product like Jiffy that comes compressed and we have to expand it, if you would just place a seedling on top and not push it down very far, that radicle will actually push out your seedling on a regular basis, and it won't necessarily affect the development of the plant as a whole, but it will affect how that plant sits in that media. And so that radicle would actually push out the plant from the media, and it would fall over. It would look leggy and gangly, but it wasn't. It was just that you didn't have enough pressure or coverage on that seed when it went to pop. We never had that problem in rockwool or a lot of our other media because it was cushioned or deep enough down in that media. So it's just something that we had to learn. And then with our lighting, if we wanted to go with intense lighting to kind of promote some vigorous growth or root development at the beginning, we also had to take an effect of, if we made this stout plant in media like rockwool, I'll show you some pictures in a bit of how that plant would get really compact with really good root development and really good leaf development, but it would be so compact that it would sit against the media, and the media was wet, and you start to saw some rotting and some chlorotic effects on the edge of those leaves. And it was a really hard time figuring that out. It sounds so obvious now, but for a while we weren't really sure what we were doing until we dialed back our light intensity a little bit. We didn't have that effect in other media because the leaves didn't sit so tight up against the media because they were sat higher in the media when we planted the seed. But we saw that very often in rockwool, and it took us a while to get that right. So just some considerations to take there. Here's some products that we've used. I've mentioned a couple of these already. These are great examples of the different types of media I've spoken of. So Grodan makes rockwool. Rockwool is made mostly in Europe from basalt rock. If you're not familiar with rockwool, again, it's completely inert. They actually melt down basalt rock and then cool it through a tunnel and weave it like cotton candy. And it makes this great wool product. It was originally an insulation product, and then they found use for it in horticulture, specifically in hydroponics, and it was wonderful. I've used that product quite a bit, and like I said, it's used pretty widely. There are other companies that do make stone wool or rock wool, as they call it, but Grodan is what we use here at Eden Green. And then we use Jiffy. Jiffy is well known in some of the big box stores and retail stores for the pots you can buy and all that, but they actually have a very big presence in the horticulture industry, specifically for horticulture. They make great little plugs and blocks and everything of compressed peat. It's a great product. In my opinion, we just started trialing a lot more Jiffy as they came out with the J7 organic plug in 3 different sizes. We've had a lot of success with that I'll show you later on. That can be certified organic. You can also get inorganic with fertilizer charges. And then I think they have different concentrations of the peat, and maybe can do some blends, but I'm not sure about that. Clever Pot. This is my my challenge. Clever Pot is used very widely in Europe, or a product there as. It's very similar to Jiffy in that it's a compressed peat product. It doesn't expand as much as Jiffy. It's made with Baltic peat. It's pressed Baltic peat. And it's not certified organic, but that's not really as big of a thing in Europe. Most lettuce growers in Europe are using a product like Clever Pot or Clever Pot. And the biggest knock for us was it doesn't have a net around the actual product. So whereas rockwool won't fall apart, the Jiffy product actually has a net around it that doesn't let the peat moss fall out. The Clever Pot was not covered. And so it made outstanding seedlings and great root development. But if we transplanted it into our system, or even in our propagation system, we would get a lot of clogging. And you can make some procedural changes and some protocol changes to kind of help that. But we had to do a lot of math on whether that was worth it. If the difference between the products we got out of Clever Pot was better than something like Jiffy or Grodan, we would invest in filters and processes and things like that to keep that out. But we never got to that point. It is something that I will continue to investigate and try to make work, because I was very happy with that product. iHort is a company that made an emulsified product, the blends. They would do any blend of peat and soil or whatever I would ask for, with or without fertilizer charge. It was a great product. We had some success with it. If it dried out, you could not re-wet it, much like rockwool. And so we had to learn that lesson. It also did very well in our system to a point, came in several different sizes. I would recommend it if it's something that you want to try or get comfortable with. And then Rio Coco is an example of cocoa core that you can get. There was only one product that we used that was coconut core. It was the CBOP plug from Horticulture, but there are several options out there of core that you could use in a system, and a lot more coming online actually that I haven't tried yet. So those are some of the companies and products that you can look into if you want to dive into these a little bit deeper, but this is what we used at Eden Green. Some of the things I just spoke about kind of reiterated here so you can see things laid out. I also have listed here jute. The jute we used was called Holland plug, as you can see down there at the bottom. That can be labeled organic in the United States, but it's not yet. And that company is called Holland Plug. That was the one that I had a hard time getting a hold of. We also used Oasis. Oasis was used, Smithers Oasis Media was used when I started here. I've used Oasis right next to Rockwool most of my career, and I've had success with it. I've just always been more comfortable with Rockwool. That is a personal preference. Oasis offers a lot of the benefits of Rockwool, along with some other benefits, and I know they have a really good research team. They're based out of Ohio that do a lot of good. I've just always leaned more Rockwool. It's just me being set in my ways, I guess, a little bit there, but it is a great a great product. You can see the two types of peat that we used. This kind of lays out some of the sizes and some of the aspects of that, where the Jiffy is covered and the cover pot is not. The Rockwool comes in an AO and an AX plug, so that just has to do with whether it has a flat top or if it's cut at the bottom, or basically how you want to lay it in your tray, if you want the flat part to be at the bottom or if you want the flat part to be at the top. Right now we use an AO plug. We use the 36 by 40 plug, which is the about 1.5 inch, and the 25 by 40, which is the 1 inch. And then the core that we used was the CBOP from Hort Americas, which stands for closed bottom organic plug or pellet, I believe. And that was one of the first products that allowed you to use a coconut core that was in a net, so that it didn't fall apart in your system. Oops. So some of the takeaways from our media trials that we got right off the bat, we use an ebb and flow system. That was kind of by necessity rather by design. I had never done ebb and flow and prop before that. It was what we had to work with and what worked best with our pump system. And it was definitely a trial by fire and a big learning curve, but we got it figured out. Some of the things that we figured out right off the bat and in time actually was Rockwool can go a long time without watering. If you study Rockwool or read up on it, they recommend somewhere around a 40% dryback for root development in Rockwool, meaning you'd actually want that to dry out so that your roots have to go looking for water. And this is another concept that a lot of people will talk about, how you push your root development out of media. And so we would actually do a trial where we would weigh how much water it took to saturate a flat of Rockwool, which is normally about a gallon, I think 2 gallons. 2 gallons per flat is what we would use. And you get full saturation, it would weigh around 9 kilograms. And so we would weigh it every day without watering it or anything in our environment until it got down to 40%, or right around 40%. So about 38% the weight or kilograms, 2.8 kilograms. And then we would water again, and we'd try that against something else where you could just water it every day and keep that Rockwool saturated. What you see is that dryback allows for much more vigorous root development within the Rockwool, allowing the plant to develop in the Rockwool, and you don't have to water as much until those roots get out because it'll fill up that media, as opposed to keeping it wet all the time out of caution or necessity, where those roots are actually going to pop out of that Rockwool and try to get out of that Rockwool, which you could define as vigorous, but now you have to maintain roots outside of that Rockwool, which means you just have to water more often. That can cause problems. You can actually drown your roots. You can promote algae growth, pests. We'll get in there, fungus gnats and shore flies, and it's much harder to manage. And so we struggled with that in our ebb and flow when we started right away. But we've kind of figured that out. Jiffy and Rockwool needed about 2 waterings in the first 14 days. And then it was root dependent. So depending on how often we watered or how much we watered that again to that dryback, I can actually take Jiffy the full 3 weeks through our prop without touching it and get really good root development. And you'll see some pictures soon enough. on how we did that also. And then getting those roots to actually pop out, and then how you manage that watering after that was also a challenge with the Jiffy. But again, trial and error, we found out that we can manage that both ways, and what works best in our system, we're still kind of figuring out right now. And then depending on size and shape, again, we talked just about the watering events right now. And then if you cover your media or not cover your media, this is what I talked about earlier with the radical pushing out. And so I think we are at a point where we may try some sand options or maybe some vermiculite options for covering, but I'm wary as to what it's going to do to my system physically, and my pumps and my screens and filters. Here you can see a graph of our trial data, kind of where the rubber hits the road. These are average seedling weights in grams per plug. This is usually 1 plant on lettuces and up to 4 plants with something like basil, depending on the varieties. But this is an average for some lettuces that we've had. We keep seedling data every week, but this was a pertinent trial that we did just for these 7 plugs. We don't typically grow them all at the same time. It was not a giant sample size, but they were grown consistently. Same fertilizer, same watering, not same watering, watering consistent with the media. All notes on that. And then what we did is took a fresh weight. We cut off at basically at the crown of all the media, and then made sure that we had a consistent number of plants in the plugs, and then took a weight average of 10 plants and then 15 plants on 2 different occasions. So you can see here, and take what you will out of this. Essentially, you know, Jiffy won out at this point. This is a recent test, actually. Some of this may depend on how my employees managed it, how I managed it, or what we learned. And so obviously we're going to do this all over again, and try it again with some of our winners. It may not look like a significant difference when you talk about 0.6 of a gram, but again, this is your starting point for finishing and transplanting into, for us, for our vines or your channels or another plug. That Jiffy's got a head start on everything. And you should see that if your environment is consistent over time and you're finishing, translate into that difference at 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 ounces later on down the line when you harvest these plugs a little bit time later. The only caveat I would say to this is that the jute plugs, the Holland plug, was significantly smaller than the rest. Everything else was the medium size available for that. So the CBOP was a little wider but shorter. The Jiffy was the medium. I think that's a 36 millimeter. The Rockwell, we did the 2 sizes because we grow in both of them. We were surprised at those being so close, but again, that start of those roots, we had much better root development within the 1.5 inch Rockwell plug than the 1 inch, just because of space and aeration availability, I think, and more size, really. And that actually translated to a bigger plant at harvest. And that's just a good synopsis of what we got on those plugs. Here's some pictures I'd like to talk to with you guys. So you can see some Rockwell versus some Jiffy grown at the same time. This is what happens when you water them the same. Those are not great examples of what Rockwell can do. You can do much better in Rockwell. But on our first run there, you can see this is butterhead lettuce. We use the Julian calendar, so that's what you're seeing on that tag there. It was transplanted 16 days after these were planted, so these are 16 days old. We use a pretty high light intensity with these, so that's why they're pretty compact. You have a lot of good leaf development, good color, but you can just see the vast difference between the Rockwell and the Jiffy. I'd be the first to admit that these are different sizes. That was what we had to work with at that point in time. And we were very happy with that. Then this again translated to a big difference in production down the line. You can see the Clever Pot there. That was a great plug. Really like that plug. Just an example there of some butterhead lettuce. We have a lot of pictures of this doing really well. We could get up to 3 seeds in there and they'd all be the same size at that point, which was great. Really good root development, good color, nice fine root hairs coming off there. And then there's a Jiffy J7 plug in production. So Later on, when we dialed our light in a little more, you can see that that picture is very recent on the right, and how that has worked out for us. It's probably our plug of choice right now is the Jiffy J7 plug, just for our system. And I cannot highlight or say that enough, actually. A couple more pictures. We have some good development of rock wool there. You don't see a lot of algae on top of that. It is very wet. That was probably right after a watering. Again, that's a butterhead lettuce. Little elongation of your leaves there, but still good leaf development. Starting to touch a little bit, so we may have wanted to space those out, but it's a good idea of what that rock wool development looks like after a little over a week. And then you can see that J7 root development. This is actually in a tray. We got as close as we could with the camera down there. And you can see how those roots are popping out, getting some good air roots there, knowing that you're filling in up and down that plug and not just pushing out the bottom is a good sign to me. I have a lot of roots growing in that inside that plug right there. And when they come out, they're healthy and they look good. And then on the right, you can see our Jiffy Roots in system. Now, this shows a little bit of some caveats with our system and how we plant in our system and how it waters, which we'll talk about later. But what you can see here is how that translates. Number one, again, you can't really see the media anymore. That's a ball of roots. It's really thick. You can see the aeration it provides when they come out. And again, that has to do more with our system, but that's what that translates in. Your water roots at the bottom and your air roots at the top. Just some quick outlines or some outcomes of what we saw there. I'll let you guys read over those. Really what it came down to is the Jiffy plugs really outperformed everything for us in our system with our settings. The larger media always beat out smaller media, which seems elementary, but you never know. And we're trying to develop our new transplants and production with a peat plug, whether it be Jiffy or a Clever Pot or something like that. We really like that production in our system. I think you could rival that with rock wool, but I'll never be able to certify rock wool organic. And regardless of your feelings toward organic production, that is a premium. If you're going to put the time and money into it, you can charge more money for that organic product. So it's a consideration to be made nonetheless. Let's see. Some of the things that I've kind of mentioned here already, there are some takeaways. Choose your media by purpose, by space, and by your watering. If you're going to mist or overhead water, you want something that's going to allow that water to penetrate down and you get without getting stratification in your root zone. Make sure if you're going to heat that, you know, it's a product that either wards off or holds that heat without burning your roots at the bottom. How much space do you have and how much do you want to put out? Propagation can almost always be a limiting factor in your production cycle and your crop schedule. And again, work with what you're good at and what you're comfortable with, and keep testing always. Keep asking why. We need more collaboration on this, I think. I think there's a lot of industry standards out there. I think there's a lot of common beliefs, which are mostly true, I would say. But I think that there's a whole world of discovery left out there and probably a lot of people doing things that haven't shared or you know, some things that haven't been done yet. So I'd really love to hear from people on what you've done with media. Dr. Masabni, before I go into nutrients and recirculation, do you want to open for questions or do you want me to continue?
No, please go ahead. I don't know if you can see the chat box.
Yes, I can see. I haven't opened it. Let's see here.
I guess last comment is something you can answer. What about the environmental impact from potential nutrient leaching?
Oh, good. That's that's actually something that I'm going to go into on this next part of my slideshow. I will talk a little bit about the let's see here. So so the disposal of rock wool was one question. That's something I'm actually very interested in. I've spoken to a lot of people about that. That's kind of what we refer to as a dirty little secret for some growers, people that feel bad about using rock wool. It is not compostable. It is technically recyclable if in Europe right now. And so I'm interested to see, I actually did a survey with a student out of Cornell a couple of weeks ago who's looking into some of this right now. I'm very interested to see if people would recycle the rock wool if it was offered. And so from what I understand, what they're doing is they're taking back or buying back the used rock wool, and they're just melting it back down into rock, and either using that for rock wool or they're using that for rock, in a sense, as an additive rock to whatever you need to add rock to. There's a level of sludge. Sorry about that. There's a level of sludge there that they use from the rock wool process also, but it is not compostable, and you do just throw it away. And I think that's a huge problem that isn't spoken about a lot. It's one of the reasons that I'd like to get away from rock wool, despite how good it can grow plants. And then I see, Mickey, I see your comment there also. I agree with that. I don't think that the rock wool itself pollutes, but it is space. And I think it's a much larger volume than anyone is willing to imagine of how much rock wool is actually in the United States right now. It's big. It's a lot. I don't have the number, but it's pretty crazy.
All right, okay. That's it. Let's go on. That's it.
Good.
Can
Yep.
I ask you one question before
Sure.
you continue? Your median chart, you say the different size or different weight, seedling weight. Are you weighing the plant plus plug? Did you?
No, it's not plus plug. It is just
the plants.
Just fresh weight. We also do a leaf count, which I didn't include on here.
Oh, okay. Okay.
The leaf count is basically to, I guess we're just used to knowing it now, but what a true leaf count does, if you don't count the cotyledons, you can have 2 5-gram plants, and one can have 3 leaves and one can have 7 leaves. And a lot of times that is a product of light. If you're stretching your plants out, all of your energy is going to go into making that stem so that plant can find light. And so while you have the same amount of weight, you're not producing the product you're trying to produce. You're producing stem that you don't sell instead of leaves. So for us, it's important to do a true leaf count when we do these weights. I apologize for not including that. I just totally assumed that. Yeah.
What do you think cause these differences?
What I think in our system we get a better buffering capacity with our Jiffy. So we don't have huge swings in our EC or pH, but our watering can be inconsistent with our pump pressure depending on what else is going on in our greenhouse, and that's just a product of the system that would be fixed in a new greenhouse. But if we had to miss a watering event, if our pH or EC fluctuated for a specific reason, or if we didn't flush a tank or something like that, the Jiffy tends to give us a lot more margin of error. Not only that, I think there is something to be said about organic material and growing an organic plant, not organic food-wise, organic as in it's a live plant in something that's alive and organic also. That's a whole nother discussion, but I think that's what drove this the most. I think we would have seen a lot similar production out of the Clever Pot. We didn't include that here because we didn't have samples. Whereas to say you can do it with an iHort or a rock wool, but I think the combination of the peat and the size, as in it's taller and not wider, I think that really added to it. That would be my hypothesis.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Okay, I'm going to try to dive into this. This next topic is something that is fresh to me, that I've just been really diving into and I've been talking to a lot of people about. And it has to do with recirculating nutrients in a closed loop system and how you should manage that. And I had a hard time writing these slides because I never know where people come in. So I apologize if I go over too much that you guys have talked about or that you all know, but this is something, the best way I thought to maybe present it. So obviously we start with macro and micronutrients. There are arguable amount, but typically you have NP and K, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. That's your macros, along with your magnesium, sulfur, and calcium right underneath that. It's kind of sub macros. And then you have all your micros, starting with iron, and then molybdenum and manganese and all those. Everyone is probably familiar with that, or at least bought a product with that, or you've seen a fertilizer bag in a store that has that 10-10-10 or 20-20-20, which is NPK ratio. And so knowing what you need is the beginning of this discussion, what you have to add to your water in order for this to really work and to be able to feed plants. Skip through that, sorry, there we go. So a couple other little basics here. The uptake and the pH. So if you know what nutrients you need to put in, those nutrients are added by becoming ions, meaning they have a positive or negative charge. When a plant has to keep up with the balance of that pH within the water and the plant and the nutrients, it has to trade one for one. And so when you use something like an ammonium or a nitrate there, the NO3, as your nitrogen source, you're taking a negative ion out of that water, so you're going to add that back in the form of the OH there. And the same thing goes for positive ions. And so in a greenhouse like Eden Green, where we use a lot of nitrogen fertilizer because we grow lettuce and it's all leafy greens and nitrogen has a big role in that, we are constantly fighting a high pH because we're adding a lot of negative ions in as opposed to what we're taking out. And so you use a buffer there, and you look for other ways you can treat that water, maybe fertilizer sources. But this basically plays in, this is kind of an intro to how we can look at recirculating water. Because if you don't ever leach that water or replace that water, even when you buffer, if you're going to buffer with a nitric acid can supplement as much as 50% of the nitrogen to your nutrients. And if you're not calculating for that, you could add a lot of nitrogen. And while it may not become toxic, you can get nutrient lockout. So you can use sulfuric acid or phosphoric acid, but they're all going to add ions to that. And so you need to find a way to manage your pH, not only with the buffer, but also with the fertilizers that you're using in a closed system. And then there's ratios of ions. So basically with all of these nutrients that you're adding in, they have to be relative in ratios to each other. So if you're going to have certain receptors on roots that allow for negative or positive ions to the cations to be uptake in the cation exchange capacity, if you have the same amount of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, it's going to take up equal parts of nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, or whatever nutrient you want to add there. And so equal parts means equal uptake. The problem is the plant doesn't need equal parts of these nutrients, and definitely not at the same time. And so you have to actively manage that. And this is why we use preset fertilizer ratios, or we mix our own. If you don't monitor that ratio, you're going to run into issues. More than likely, it's going to be a lockout of other nutrients before it's going to be a toxicity level, but you can run into toxicity problems. And then if you have a lockout, a lot of people are going to argue that that's because of a pH issue, whereas a high or low pH will lock out several different types of nutrients, when really it's because you have way too much potassium to nitrogen, and you're not uptaking the same amount, the right ratios that you should be. So you have different rates at which these nutrients are used within a plant. And so a plant's going to uptake something like nitrogen, the NPK, the macros, much faster and more often than anything else. Those things like the micros, like the molybdenum and the copper and the chlorine and the zinc, they have to be there for certain processes. So you have to consider that in your ratios, but they're micros because they don't always have to be there if the plant's not using them for bud development or termination or anything like that. And so they have to be in there, but they're not really as active as something else. And then calcium and specifically calcium and boron are very passive, calcium being at the root of most tip burn issues because it's a passive and immobile nutrient. And that plant only takes it up and moves it as it takes up water. And that gets into issues of root zone pressure and VPD and how much you're actually, that plant's transpiring. So it's important to know these things in a closed circulating system, because if you've added all of your ratios correctly when it started and your plants start eating that food and taking certain ions out and replacing them or not replacing based on what that plant is doing, your ratios are going to get upset real quick. And it's going to happen fast, and you're going to see it, and you're not going to know, and you're not going to know how to fix it. So that is basically what we're talking about as far as the ratios of ions and how you need to replace that. So in recirculating systems, you can fight this a couple ways. And the big question is, how do you balance your ratios without wasting water? Most home units, small reservoirs, you can just take your tank after 2 weeks or 10 days. You don't even have to measure. You dump it out and you start with a fresh solution. That's pretty easy when you have 50 or even 100 gallons for a reservoir. When you get to commercial levels, and even smaller commercial levels, a 10,000 square foot greenhouse, you may need, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10,000 gallons of water, depending on your system and how many plants you have. Now that's a whole new ballpark, especially if you're a smaller business and you have to dump out 10,000 gallons, not only financially and labor wise, but also on the other end, are you allowed to be dumping that much nutrient out? Do they know about it? Is that a problem? So you have to really worry about that as you scale up. It's not a very good option. At least not at one time that way. And plus then you're dealing with a time when your plants don't have all the nutrients they have, depending on the downtime and the turnaround time of that actual nutrient swap over. And you have to find the right day or do it at night, so you're not stressing your plants out by having to turn your water off. And there's a slew of things to consider when you do that full dump and then replacement action. But it's a guaranteed way, if you mix correctly, to replenish your ions in the perfect ratio. So on the surface, it works out very well if you can deal with some of the ill effects of it. Another method that I've used quite a bit because it has become necessary is a constant leach. So in this, what we're doing is you're using some micro irrigation and you're plugging it in somewhere in your system as it's active, and you're doing the math on this. If I have that micro tube leaching out, 100 milliliters of water every minute, you times that by an hour and the amount of hours in a day and how many days a week, and then you can multiply that up to liters. And then you can see how much you're actually leaching off in a slower leach. That lowers the stress on your system as far as like not having to turn your water off, not having to dump several thousand gallons at one time, not having to dump this into whatever system that you're using or field at one time. It's a little more subtle. It's the same effect as dumping a full, except you don't get to use this clean, fresh water. On the other end of that, as I'm constantly leaching, I'm constantly dosing. So I have an automated dosing machine that will measure my pH and EC. And so as long as my stock tank nutrients are in the right ratios, every 100 liters I'm dumping out, I'm adding 100 liters of fresh, correctly balanced nutrient water and pH ready. And so that actually works. It's worked. Tomato growers, you'll hear, or I've heard, you're talking about 30 to 40% of a leach off over time because of the way tomatoes use nutrients. With lettuce, I've done about 10% of a leach off, which with 1,500 gallon tanks, that's still 150 gallons a week. So that can add up, but at least it's more subtle. And it gives me a little bit better control and keeps my nutrients a little more balanced as long as I'm mixing correctly and I am getting that turnover. So the last thing that is fairly new to me, because this takes a lot of reading and kind of research, is this mass balance and testing. I was first introduced to this with a lab technician or a lab consultant that I've worked with in the past with one of the labs I use for testing, pointing to a couple papers, namely one from Bruce Bugby on mass balance and testing and recirculating systems. And basically, there's some arguments here that are worthy of discussion. And that's saying that, if you measure your water and you know that you need to add X amount of phosphorus, I have millimoles here, 0.5, and then you measure it again the next day and it's at 0, then you didn't lose that. The plants used all that. So that mass balance means that that's either in your water or it's in your plant. And if you're giving it more than it needs, you're going to get accumulation in your system and then nutrient lockout. If you're not getting it enough, you should see a deficiency. Fine line to balance there, but dude, there's lots of research out there and there's lots of articles you can read that will tell you, we have lots of recipes specifically for something like leafy greens. And if you're overfeeding, you get that imbalance, you will get that lockout. And so there's a lot of things you can read on how much nutrients your plants actually need. And you can be very, very active in what you're adding to your water at what times. Part of the issue with this is, before I start with this slide, if you're measuring your EC is only telling you your electric conductivity. So you can have a consistent EC of 2.0 for 6 months, but that tells you absolutely nothing about your fertilizer. It only tells you that you have salts in your water. And it cannot tell you that you have 180 ppm of nitrogen and 40 ppm of phosphorus. It can't tell you that. It only tells you that of all the salts that you put in there, you have the right EC. But you could be feeding your plants entirely wrong. And a lot of these things, like your passive calcium, if the plant's not transpiring as much one day from the next, your calcium is going to build up, because in a system like mine where I'm constantly injecting, it's going to add the same amount no matter what I do. There's been a call for things like inline testing so that you can actually do testing of what ions are in your water as you're watering your plant. This can be expensive. I've not even dived into that option yet because I know the expenses there, and I'm not sure how much I test that or trust that. But that is what would make this mass balance much more effective if there was a way to know that in real time. And I'll get to some other options on that in a bit. For your fertilizer selection in a system that's closed loop like this, or even semi-closed, these are some things you need to consider. Obviously, when making those decisions, you can go with different sources of nitrogen, phosphorus, or potassium. You can go organic or traditional or a blend if you really wanted to. And they all take different considerations, but these are kind of blanket. Your alkalinity, the number one and first and foremost rule for anything like this, when trying to get fertilizers built into your system, is that you do a spot water test. Get a very good lab to do a test of all your water. It will tell you things like your alkalinity or the amount of calcium carbonates, and that drastically affects how much you can balance your water, your pH with some of your buffers. It's super important knowing the hardness of your water. What is your source water? Here at Eden Green, we use city water. It has a lot of benefits in that I know it's clean and I know where it comes from. It's consistent, and I'm not going to be dealing with things hopefully like any microbes or algae coming in from their source. If you use pond water, or even if you collect rainwater, there are significant amounts of tests you need to do on a regular basis. And that's also going to affect the ability to buffer that water too. But with my city water, I'm going to have things like chlorine pumped in with my water, and I have to be very conscious of that. And other nutrients and salts that come in also. And then the EC of your source, my water comes in here at about a 0.3 to a 0.5, depending on the time of year. So if my target's 2, I need to make sure that I'm adding, my actual set point is 2.5, because otherwise I need to consider that 0.5 of the EC that's coming in from my source water legitimately as I measure my EC throughout my system. And then temperature. I'm a big proponent of water temperature. I know you guys have talked about that a little bit today. That root zone temperature is so important to keep in that right level, and it can be such a proactive step to not having to add chemicals or buffers. If you can just control that root zone temperature, you'll have good dissolved oxygen levels, and you'll be able to limit the amount of pythium and other pathogens that are in there. Not always doable for everyone and expensive, but here at Eden Green, we are able to actually control our water temperature, like I said earlier. But that's going to change throughout the year. I would recommend doing source water tests on a regular basis, something like quarterly, if you really want to get an idea, especially if you're on a municipal system. They will change things that are in that water on a regular basis as they need to treat the water. And especially if you're outside or rainwater, that's going to change as you collect in its stores. So keep that in mind to do lots of testing. Some of the things I just hit on here. So how often you want to test your actual water for nutrients. And so I'm actually talking about legitimate lab testing to tell yourself how much of each nutrient is in your water. This is the only way to be 100% sure that you're getting out what you're putting in. Do all the math and buy all the best fertilizers and get all your mixes right and use whatever calculator you want. At the end of the day, you have no idea what's in your water unless you test, and you don't know what's in your plants unless you test. And it's kind of a combination of those tests on a regular basis to tell you how successful you are. And obviously, as you've used a greenhouse and a system, because everybody's is different, you get more used to this and you may not have to test as often. Don't fall back on your haunches, but maybe you don't have to test weekly. I've worked for companies that we would send off water samples from each tank every week. No matter what, you were sending off water samples, and you would set up your mix schedule so that you were getting your test results back before you would mix your next batch. So smaller batches of stock solution, mixing more often, and knowing what results you're getting. So if my test came back that I had an imbalance between my nitrogen and my potassium in my last batch, I already had the results in hand to say when I mix my next batch that I can change those up a little bit to correct for it. And that's just more knowledge for you as a grower or a manager to be able to control the ions that are in your fertilizer. And the availability of labs can be difficult. I've struggled with this in places. At one point in my career, I was sending lab samples off to the Netherlands because after all was said and done, it was cheaper and quicker than any place in the United States. And a lot of them will offer bulk discounts. For us at that point, we needed weekly test samples. It's hard to get that. Universities are very good at testing for you, but they often have a longer turnaround time, and you can run into holiday and class schedules from time to time. And a lot of labs aren't set up for agricultural testing, specifically hydroponic testing. And so they're not going to give you the same kind of feedback or what's your results. I would recommend everybody find a good lab. I've used MG Labs out of Georgia, and I've used JR Peters, very reputable sources that I would recommend checking out. It just has to work in your budget, but they can at least do spot testing for you and give you very pertinent results and data back. We have recently moved to on-site testing. So there's a product from Hanna Instruments, who I use a lot of their instruments and meters. Hanna actually makes a spectrometer, photospectrometer, that will measure 6 of our nutrients on site. You have to buy this tabletop tester that basically shoots light and measures it through your liquid, and you have to buy a lot of reagents. And then it takes some time. It probably takes one of my greenhouse technicians anywhere from 1 to 2 hours to run all 7 tests by the time you get your samples, get set up and get done. But it is a great spot test, and that can tell us if we did something wrong or right, or we at least have weekly results from ours that we can put up against another lab and see if we're doing it right, if our results are testable. Like I said, that machine costs about $700. You'll probably spend about $1,200 total. Don't quote me on that. If you want like a year's worth of samples and you're going to test every week or 10 days. But you got to put the time in, and that's one thing you got to read the manual on, among all things, because it is pretty technical and you have to follow the rules. And so there's a great picture of me in our greenhouse testing some light out actually. But back to our data, our nutrients, if you're adjusting to your testing, this goes back to that mass balance. You don't want to just swing real heavy one way. If your potassium was really low last week, excuse me, and your target was 300 and you got 120, don't try to get to 300 the next week, especially if you're mixing stock tanks. If you're mixing stock tanks, you still have an active amount of your old nutrients in the system that you're adjusting with. And so you have to take that into consideration. Unless you just do a full dump and start all over, which you can do, you need to be aware of what's already in your system, and you need to take steps over a couple weeks or a couple mixes to really get that back. This is especially useful if you don't have a giant issue right off the bat. So you may have an imbalance in your ions, but due to the plants you're growing or due to the actual ion that you're dealing with, you don't have an issue of toxicity or deficiency, but if you continue down that path, you will. So it's important to adjust, but make sure they're subtle. And then record keeping. We keep several spreadsheets. There's a lot of apps out there now that help you do this also. And if you work with a lab like Jiffy, they actually send you these results in an Excel file that you can just copy over. Keep track of all these, trace it over a year. At the very least, it's going to tell you your fertilizer use on a different level. And at most, it's going to give you this amazing picture of how your plants fed throughout the year, because plants will feed differently summer to winter. And you do need to adjust your EC and sometimes your fertilizer throughout the year, depending on what's going on. And so this is a great way to check at the end of the year or grow season how you manage your nutrients and how that affected your plants when you balance that against yields or deficiencies or pictures or aesthetic problems. So I cannot say enough about record keeping. And lastly, again, call for collaboration. Again, you're going to hear me say this a lot, but this is just what I've done in my career and at my current greenhouse. And so I would heavily ask everyone to share information. There's no secret sauce, in my opinion. Lettuce nutrients are the same pretty much no matter where you're growing. There's 5 or 6, really good templates out there. Everybody's going to do their own thing, but nobody gets outside of 50 to 100 ppm different depending on the nutrients. So you're not I don't think there's anything out there like that. It's more important for us to learn from each other and learn together, so we can make calls as an industry. And that is the end of that slide. Or my nutrients and my recirculating systems. I'm going to look at the questions here real quick. Okay, let's see. Wes said, can the leached water be filtered and reused in any way? Yeah, it can. It's brown water. And so there's a couple different systems you can look at here. If you're going to use RO water, or if you're going to use any kind of filtration system like that, that's going to change this system a little differently. But for the most part, if you're leaching off, that is considered brown water. You can water plants with it. It's obviously not drinkable. You're not supposed to dump a lot into a certain area because you can get algae blooms in water sources, or you can get leaching through the soil also. So you can reuse it. Your options are limited in that.
Let me follow up on this, Aaron.
Mhm.
Let me continue this as question, because I get that all the time. The leachate is not toxic, right? It is just an imbalance of the nutrient. The NPK is taken up by the plant, and then some of the stuff is still there. So it's not toxic. It's just if you spend the money and the effort to analyze it, it is possible to recycle it or add to it if you know exactly what's in it and what's missing, correct? In theory.
In theory, yes.
In practicality, may not be possible because it's just too expensive.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I read that differently from Wes, where he was asking about our actual, not the leachate, but what we're actually dumping off as good nutrient. So in order to actually replace with fresh nutrient, sometimes that nutrient isn't as imbalanced, but you're absolutely right. It's about the balance of those nutrients, and they may not be able to do anything good for you after it's been leached off. Let's see. Next, Eric says, how much of a specific ion concentration can one automate? And what about our RO, which is reverse osmosis, and then adjust again? It's a big topic for us right now at Eden Green as we develop our next 2 greenhouses and what we're going to use for our system there. So I don't know of any system out there because, again, I haven't really opened that door. I think it's a bit of a hole to jump down, and I don't know that it's feasible economically to do that. But if you can inject all of your nutrients separately, if you want to get a dosatron or dosmatic system and do 1 to 1 to 1 to 1 to 1 or whatever you want your ratio to be of all 17 nutrients if you want to. And in which case, if you could measure, you could just tweak that doser if you wanted. On a mass level, on a big commercial greenhouse, you're going to have stock solutions. And again, you could have stock solutions of every single tank if you wanted to. It's probably overkill. We can attest just history as an example. We may not be doing things the best way right now, but I know that the method I use right now works really well and that I get really good lettuce by all standards commercially. So it's about how much work I want to put into that for what I'm going to get out to it also, which is the consideration to take with all your changes. I think it would be great to see a system like that come alive and online, but I don't know enough about it to be able to really talk any more about it.
Oh, Alan, can you share the 2 names of the commercial lab you test your nutrients? I remember one is JR Lab.
It's JR Peters.
JR Peters.
Yeah, they're great. They're probably the one I prefer to use most. I think a typical lab test is going to cost you around $40, depending. And then they have bulk rates, or I don't know how else they work with you there, but I use them a lot because I like the format they deliver in and because of the consultation they offer. The other one, I think it's MGM or MCM. I'll have to look. It's in Georgia. I've used them also. They don't cater specifically to agriculture or hydroponics, and so they do give very scientific results. So I'm trying to look for people that are familiar with the hydroponic industry, and a lot of times you can go to your nutrient company and ask them what they do or what they recommend, depending on the type of nutrients you're using.
Yeah, that's very good. Thank you.
Let's see. Okay. All right. I thought I saw, nitric acid, real quick from Gail. I'm lucky enough to be able to fulfill one of my goals with our company, which is to source locally. There is a chemical mixing company right down the road from us in Crawley, Texas, that does a wonderful job of getting us whatever we want. And so most of the time with nitric acid, it's very caustic and can be very dangerous. And you often cannot buy it without some kind of permit. There's not a lot of places that'll sell it to you. And if they're going to sell it to you, I think the lowest level they're going to go is 35%, which is still a bit dangerous. It's always dangerous, but a little more dangerous. And so this company we have down the road is wonderful enough to sell us 35% that we use to clean some of our UV lights, but they also specially mix us 5% nitric acid, which is what we use to adjust as a buffer right now. I know typically there's a lot of arguments out there. I've talked to some chemists about this, what to use as a buffer. Sulfuric, phosphoric, and nitric. I think sulfuric is one of the most usable because it's a little safer. What I've seen in my line of work is that if you want to get some of the over-counter organic stuff like a citric acid, does a great job impacting, but I tend to notice that it doesn't have the staying power. I can't prove that. I don't know the chemistry on it well enough. I've never tested it, but what I see out of nitric acid is nitrogen out of phosphorus and sulfuric acid and nitrogen. It has the best effect in longevity in my experience, and it's adding nitrogen, which is something that I can be very flexible around. I only have 1 or 2 sources of phosphorus, and so it's a little harder for me to adjust, but my nitrogen being a driving factor in my fertilizer mix or resi, I really like using nitric acid. Okay, I'm going to jump out of this a second and make sure I have the right slide. So bear with me a second, everyone, if you would, please. Sorry about that. 1 minute. I gotta switch slideshows real quick, guys. Thanks for the good questions. I always appreciate great questions like that, and it helps me stay on my game too. So anything I can do.
Hey, Aaron, while you're loading, I've gotten email questions. If you can share your PowerPoint.
Yeah, I'm going to open that one up in a second, but yeah, go ahead with your question if you'd like.
No, like, can you, do you
Oh,
mind send a copy,
yeah.
like a PDF copy, so I can forward it to the
yeah.
participants?
Again, I'd like to claim that I did this on my own, but I have a very good director of marketing who really made this happen for me. So
if there's no private information,
no.
then make a PDF of it and send it to me. And then I can forward to the participants.
Yeah, if I'm going to preach collaboration, I'm going to support that in the sense that I will share everything that I can that's allowed by my company, so to speak. So, and we will get that information out as soon as we can. I'm going to write that down, Dr. Masabni, but if you wouldn't mind reminding me if you don't hear from me. I like to claim that I'm busy. I am busy. I know everybody's busy. So I tell all my vendors to bother me because I'll forget to bother you type of thing. So, okay. So I'm going to present this again with everyone. Let's see here, 1 minute, share my screen. I'm going to try to get through this part about lighting. I wouldn't, not necessarily quick, but I'd really like to show everybody part of the greenhouse also, if I can.
It's
I'm going to add
still not sharing the screen.
Getting there. There we go. Okay, good.
Yes.
Cool. All right. So the next topic I'd like to talk about is supplemental lighting. As I said earlier, this is from a practical standpoint. Most of the other presenters here and a lot of the people that are putting this on can probably speak more technical about lighting. I have quite a bit of experience with lighting. I like to think that I'm well read on lighting, and I wanted to share with you how we made one of our lighting decisions at Eden Green. So real quick overview, I'm sure you guys have gone over this a little bit, but how I like to explain it is, PAR and DLI, plants use photosynthetic active radiation, that's your PAR. You can also measure it in ppfd, but it's basically a measure of the actual energy, light energy in moles, which is the little photons, if you want to say so, little energy bites that come down and hit a surface. I like to use the analogy of a rain gauge with DLI. I think that translates, correct me if I'm wrong, but it basically, if your PAR is an instantaneous measurement, if you stick your hand out a window when it's raining and you catch 5 raindrops, that doesn't tell you how much rain you got over a specific amount of time. But if you measure DLI, or if you put a rain gauge outside, you catch an average of what falls in a certain space over a given amount of time. And that's what DLI is, that daily light integral. That's telling you how much light energy that plant got over a certain time in a certain space. And so that's why I use DLI. I stay away from lumens and foot candles. I really just use PAR and DLI as my measurement for light energy. The reason it's such a driver of all the factors that affect plant growth is carbon dioxide in food and water, air temperature, air movement, humidity. Light's right there, and light's the driver. If you know your photosynthetic equation, light's the catalyst in that. And so you need that light energy to drive this. And as a rule of thumb, I've heard it said a lot of times, 1% of light equals 1% of yield. I have data I can share that proves that in our greenhouse. We did not have supplemental lighting when we built our greenhouse, and I fought long and hard to get supplemental lighting. You can even be doing a good job without supplemental lighting, but significantly enhance your production with supplemental lighting. As the advent of LEDs and affordability is upon us, I suggest everyone investigate that if you're interested in increasing your yield. Okay, so some of the unique challenges we have in Eden Green, you can, oh, sorry about that. You can see our vines here that we have in our greenhouse are 18 feet tall. So we have about 3,600 plants down an aisle that you're looking at in that picture. We are vertical in a greenhouse, which means that we do everything we can to use sunlight and supplement where we can. In Texas, we are lucky enough to get enough DLI year round to grow lettuce between that 12 and 18 DLI sweet spot. But what we did at Eden Green was we put a bunch of stuff in the way. So in a typical greenhouse, you're going to lose light up to 40% through structure. And in our greenhouse, it's like 90% because you can see how big these things get in the way. You're seeing one aisle here of 50 aisles in our greenhouse. So there's 100 walls like that that block each other out. So you get this Stonehenge effect where we only get direct sunlight for a given part of the day down that aisle. So I have to learn how to supplement that. So first I looked at top light against inner vine light. So actually putting lights in between these vines. You can talk about this interlighting with tomatoes and fruiting crops. There's a lot of good data on using certain spectrum of LEDs underneath and within tomato crops and strawberry crops that can drive a level of fruit production and photosynthesis, and also help control morphology, some floriculture crops. And it really works. It does work, and it's a great tool if you understand it. When I did the math on that, in order to hit the light measurements that I need to be as profitable as I want to be, I would have had to put up so many lights in each row that it was basically counterintuitive. It would have looked more like a server room than a greenhouse at that point, with the drivers and the wires and the lights. Wasn't as worried about the heat output because it was LEDs, but even the weight on your structure comes into play at that point when you're talking about thousands and thousands of lights. So I did the next best thing and went with top lighting. That's why I picked top lights for this structure. And that presented another challenge. I need to supplement, but I need to supplement in layers. I need to know that I'm never going to get the same DLI at the top of my vine as the bottom of my vine, that I'm never going to have the exact same plant at the bottom of my vine as the top of my vine. But if I can use my supplemental lighting and sunlight in my environmental controls to drastically decrease the variability in weight and morphology from top to bottom, that's a win for me. So if I can average 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 ounces across that whole wall, I've still done my job producing consistent leafy green weight that looks good, tastes good, and grows well. So that was my goal here. It wasn't to get complete consistency up and down. It was to decrease variability and to at least increase my consistency in morphology, plant weight, and plant development. When you use LEDs, which this is the first active decision I've made to use LEDs in my greenhouse. Before I was always using some combination of HPS lights, metal halide, or a combination of those and LED lights, but I am very on board with the LEDs now. And so that took me to do a lot of research, and I had to figure it out. And in that research, you'll find that you lose heat if you don't use HPS lights. If you're in a colder northern climate, that can play a role in your heating costs in the wintertime, because you can, I think you can add like 10 to 15% of your heat through conventional HPS lights. So you have to consider that cost also. And then power. What kind of power are you going to use? An HPS light at full tilt is 1,000 watts that you're using there. My current LEDs are equal, if not better, and they're 600 to 500 watts. And so that was a big driver for us also. So here's what we set out to do. We had targets. My DLI for lettuce is between 12 and 18. If I can get a minimum of 12 and not go too much over 18, I should get good lettuce plants, per all research and my experience. At a 20-hour photo period, that means that with supplemental lighting, I can decide what's day and what's night. As long as I can supplement my temperature and humidity to agree with that, I can create my day set points for 20 hours out of a day, and then give my plants about 4 hours for respiration, for rest, to use those sugars and make more leaves and turn them right back on. And so we had a 20-hour photo period. And that 20-hour photo period dictates how many moles I need to get each hour to average to get my DLI. I also use supplemental control with meters. We used handheld meters, and we use our greenhouse meters that are part of our greenhouse system. Handheld meters are a couple $100. Make sure you get a full spectrum handheld meter. There are a couple different good products out there, and Lycor makes great meters, and then Apogee is another one right now. There's some really fancy ones that work with your phone that I recommend, but they're expensive. And so we use meters, and then so our formula comes out to this. I want my supplemental lights on within my photo period from midnight to 4 a.m. So let's say, or I'm sorry, 4 a.m. to midnight. If my sunlight is under my target par, so if my sunlight drops below, let's say 200 micromoles, I want my lights on. And if I have not met my DLI. So if it's 10 o'clock at night and the sunlight's, it's dark outside, but I've already hit 18 moles for that day or 18 DLI, my lights will not turn on. But in the middle of January, where I may not get that light, or on a cloudy day like today, here, my lights are going to be on for a full 20 hours, supplementing that light. And hopefully I hit 12 DLI most of my plants. And then we had time projections for cloudiness, saying that if it's a cloudy day or a partly cloudy day specifically, you're going to want to make sure that your lights aren't going on and off and on and off and on and off. Outside of efficiency, that can ruin the breakers in your breaker box. And so you build in this buffer that says you have to wait at least 20 minutes under a certain condition to change. And so with that in mind, we picked out 3 top lights. At the time, these were some good options, pricing, availability, and performance-wise. We have actually tested over 20 top lights at this site, and I've used more in my career, as have other people that work here. But we chose an Arise fixture from GE Current. We chose a BIOS light, and then we chose Lumigrow at the time. They were very similar. They were all top lights. They were the same wattage. All 3 companies provided us with their own light plan with our targets that I just told you in mind. So it was on them to tell us how many lights we needed, how to hang them, and all that kind of stuff. Everything was run at 220 voltage, and every light got 1 row. So 3,616 plants, 28 days in these vines under the lights. We measured both spinach and butterhead, but we only really tracked significant data for butterhead. Spinach was more a morphology thing for us. And our goal was an average of 5 ounces for lettuce with a small standard deviation. And I say small in quotations because that's all relative. So we really didn't want a lot of variation. I may have averaged 5 ounces, but I didn't want a 20-ounce plant and a 1-ounce plant. You know, I wanted to make sure that we stayed within a good range. That was our goal for this project. And so we ran this in the spring, and then we repeated it. But this is how we did our measurements, spot checks with the par meter, the handheld par meter. So I went out at night, usually after 10, and made sure I didn't have any light pollution. This is the only light out there. And I would measure at each individual plant spot. I would measure north and south end, and we would create graphs and charts, and we would do a lot of just building out based on the data, so that we could get an idea of what we were really getting out of our lights Not what the plants are necessarily seeing or no measurement on plant development, but were we really getting what the light company said we were going to get, right? And so we found that consistent. Everybody told us the truth as far as we could tell. But that translates differently when you're talking about 22 feet away from your lowest plant or 20 feet away from your lowest plant. And so we were providing them with some information that they weren't aware of. And then we had greenhouse meters that measure at the lowest point in our greenhouse in every zone. And we used those we could. They also helped us measure sunlight, and they gave us data over time. And then we took average weights at harvest and noted things like too much light, burn, heat burn or light burn, tip burn, and things like that. Here's some basic findings from that data. PS stands for plant spot. And so that top left graph, what you're seeing is plant spot 1 up to plant spot 18, plant spot 18 being at the top of a vine, plant spot 1 being at the bottom of the vine. Plant spot 18 was actually about 3 feet away, give or take, from the actual fixture. 2 feet, I'm sorry, 2 feet away. So you're looking at those on the left, that's the bottom light measurement in UMols up to the top. That is at night, fully supplemental. If you work out the DLI equation, I didn't include that here, but you can find it online. It's pretty easy. To get that DLI number, you take your average UMols, your photo period hours times 3,600 seconds in an hour, multiply all that together and divide it by 1,000,000, and that should give you a whole number for DLI. And you can see that translation in that top right thing. So if I was going to have 220 UMols for 20 hours, at minimum, I was going to get close to 17 DLI, which is right in my range. And you can also see from that pretty much between plant spots 9 and 18, so half of my plants were getting enough light to be productive for me with just supplemental lighting that does not count daylight. And now at the bottom, you see that kind of translated, so to speak. You see our average weight. Oh, shoot, sorry, guys, I'm jumping all over the place. Our average, oh my goodness, my mouse is jumping. The average weight announced by plant spots. And so this again is plant spots 1, 3, 6, 9, 12, and 18. So you're moving up the vine. And this is the average weight we got there with the standard deviation on the right. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. This would be a good spot to describe your system. I told them that it's 20 foot tall. Is that correct?
Yeah. Let me scroll back to one of those.
Yeah.
So yeah, right there.
Right there. Tell them like where is spot 1 and where is spot 18?
Great. If you guys can see my mouse, this is spot 1.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
So there are 106 plant spots at spot 1 from north to south. And then 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 18. 18 is up here, and you can see the lights. Obviously, there's a lot of glare there. Those are the Arise lights that you see in that picture. And so up here, we have since moved down. This is a little added here. We have since moved these lights down because our top 4 or 5 spots get enough of that Texas light to grow regardless. And we can increase our light down here. In the future, our pipe dream is to have this system on some AI programming that will allow us to move these lights to supplement the solar radiation based on the sunlight in each aisle and where the sun is in the sky that day. And we are actually working actively with 2 companies on that. So as the sun moves over an aisle and it's right over the middle, those lights would be all the way at the bottom, lighting just at bottom. But as that sun moves over and away, you don't get that direct sunlight, the lights would move back up to light the entire aisle. But that's our system. Does that suffice, Dr. Masabni?
Yes, plenty. Thank you very much.
Yep. Okay. So back to those results. When you're seeing that bottom plant, we're averaging 4 ounces there, which was one of our targets. Our original target was 4 ounces. I shot to 5, trying to really push this. A lot of things not told in this data. We did get a lot of tip burn because of our spectrum. And so on a higher concentration of blue light will cause that butterhead to really close up, which looks nice until you can't control your calcium and your tip burn because we don't have a lot of vertical air movement right there. And so we got a lot of tip burn. And so it wasn't the most aesthetically pleasing lettuce, but we were going for weight. You could argue that we didn't grow as well also, but that's another discussion. And then if we got any burn from heat, this was noted. Also, a lot of our top plant spots were getting a little overcooked, especially on sunny days. Before we decided where we want to put our photometers that control those lights. And that's a new addition to our system, where we are putting photocells throughout the zone at different heights and then working off of an average, or if we can even move individual lights. So there's a lot of work being done there. It's all theoretical and not in practice yet. But for this study, we hit our goal only with the GE Arise fixtures in this setting. So by no means am I saying one is significantly better for us. And in this setting, this is what worked best for us. Enough so that we have actually purchased an entire zone of these lights. And if you drive by Cleburne, Texas, you can see the pink glow for miles. I think it's pretty actually, and it's great. And it's been great for us. It's increased our yield. It's increased our consistency. It's done exactly what we wanted. I think we can do better, actually. But the biggest thing was the standard deviation. So we did get some heavy plants up top from LumaGrow and BIOS, but we did not get the consistency that we got with the Arise fixtures. And you can see that even up top in the top left, when you're only getting 33 or 25 or 30 DLI at the bottom, you're just not hitting it. So this can be increased by the number of fixtures that you put in an aisle. You can be increased by how close you are, the intensity, whether or not you're dimming. A lot of other factors go into this, but this was our first rudimentary project. We ran this twice. We got essentially the same results, and then we bought our GE current fixtures and invested in a light control system to help work them effectively. Then we've since increased our weights past this. So that is what I have on light. Before I go into a little bit about Eden Green, can we answer some questions on supplemental lighting decisions? And there's some questions there. Good. Okay.
The last question, how tall from spot 1 to 18? It's 20 feet, correct?
So actually, the actual vine, those plant spots are 11 and change inches apart. It's in millimeters. So it's almost a foot on center. So there's 18 plants over 18 feet vertically. It sits about a foot off the ground because of our HVAC control system and water system. And then those lights are actually about 2.5 feet above that plant spot. So the light to the bottom plant spot is actually closer to about 20 feet, 20.5 feet, give or take.
Okay, you have another question?
Let's see. I see this one from Mickey. Do the companies respond with custom light recommendations for everyone, or do you need to purchase a certain amount to tell them? No, everyone I work with will do a light plan for you. They have software, and specifically for smaller operations, it's easier to run that software. It runs like an AutoCAD system. And it does really great. I've worked with all these companies. In fact, I kind of use that as a guide point of whether I talk to a lighting company or not. I use the Arise fixtures now. I have 5 different kinds of lights in my propagation system, and I continue to trial that. And I will openly listen to any lighting company because I think there's a lot out there that are really trying new things, and who am I to say if it's great or not? So I'll listen to you. I have the luxury of having an R&D budget and an R&D greenhouse, so that's nice. And so they will do a light plan for you. If they don't do a light plan for you, I wouldn't trust them, honestly. You can get this, if they don't have a spec sheet that tells you footprint, that tells you the angle and your intensities over that angle. If they don't tell you your spectrum, I can see the next question talks about UVB light and red light. If they don't tell you the spectrum or whether the spectrum is controllable, like those are all red flags that you want to make sure that you get that information, because legitimate companies will give you that. And so go to a company like Current. Current is the company under GE. Current makes the Arise fixture. The Arise 1000 fixture has a spec sheet. It will tell you all of that. There's another company, even like Orion, O-R-E-O-N. It's a big light company in Europe. And they work with an American company also. Same thing. If you get their spec sheet, they're going to give you all that information and be very willing to talk to you if you want to purchase some lights. So I would use that as a gauge also. And then Todd asks, are these full spectrum lights, or is there far red or UVB, other optimizations? Different lighting companies offer different solutions. One thing that I loved about the LumaGrow lights was their ability to adapt spectrum based on your recipe for times of day. They had some amazing videos on their website of some cannabis grows in Nevada and California, where as the sun would go over, you could see these lights changing based on the spectrum that their meters were reading throughout the greenhouse. And that's awesome. Orion makes a fixture that has completely customizable light recipes for your given situation. and they are really good. I don't know that you need that. We have two spectrum of Arise fixtures. We have what they call a vegetative and a reproductive. Typically, that means vegetative runs more in blue and reproductive runs more red. There's also a lot of morphological things you can do with that type of light. As I said earlier, we grow our heading lettuce under the red spectrum now because it keeps our head open and helps us with tip burn issues. And we get a lot more prettier plant for our version. And it's another weapon we have to combat tip burn. And so that's great. They will offer lots of different spectrums, some companies more than others. I do have full spectrum. I say full spectrum in quotation marks. There's some argument about that right now, whether light's actually full spectrum. Lights in my propagation area, they're white lights. They do a pretty good job. We actually see some benefits to them. But the key here is really knowing what those color spectrums drive in your lights. So in propagation, I'm trying to keep more stout plants so that they don't run into each other and affect each other and get leggy, so I can keep them there longer while also driving significant root development. And you can do that with the right spectrum light. And then again, in finishing, I'm trying to promote leaf growth because I'm a lettuce grower and I don't want stem growth. So I don't want to reaching for it. I don't want to change the phytochrome activity in my light with my spectrums, which can make plants stretch. And I want to make sure I'm combating any outside light that I can or supplementing it. The next question I see is your light system controlled independently or in conjunction with the central controller? So the answer to that is both. I have an independent light system that I use for R&D, and then our greenhouse control system actually uses, can control our light based on outside light. It uses watts per meter squared to measure sun energy, and then we can measure PAR energy inside. Now I have a poly roof in this greenhouse, which diffuses about 30% of the light. And then I have shade curtains that I also use to diffuse light. Lettuce doesn't really like direct sunlight. It definitely doesn't like light over 1,000 watts per meter squared. And so I have to decide how to diffuse that light. There's a great read on our great study about canopy theory and how you can never really give too much light if you have a thick canopy that I would recommend reading. So but we use that control system for that algorithm is an independent control system, but you can also do that with most control systems if you would have a greenhouse control system. You just need the right light sensor and how you want to arrange that in your greenhouse. I did not say Cleveland, I'm sorry, I mean Cleburne, Texas, which is about an hour or half an hour south of Fort Worth. That's where I am right now. Thank you, Doctor. I see that you answered that. But we do give tours if anybody is interested. I've actually done a significant amount of tours with classrooms and for other people, virtual tours, which is what I'm hoping to run out there and do if I don't run out of time here, and show you guys, just give you a quick run through of the greenhouse, hopefully. Before I do that, I want to go through some slides about Eden Green, shameless pitch. This is us, we're Eden Green Technology. The number one thing to know about us is we do not sell lettuce and we do not sell leafy greens. We sell growing solutions and greenhouse systems. It is a fantastic system that was developed over 10 years by two brothers who moved over from the construction industry in South Africa to try and grow food for people that didn't have food everywhere. That was their goal, and they put their blood, sweat, and tears into it, brought it to the US, and I'm helping them develop it right now. So once again, we sell greenhouses and grow system solutions. I have to grow lettuce to prove that, and I'm lucky to be able to do that. Here's some highlights about us. We have a 1 acre greenhouse in Cleburne, Texas. That is our proof of concept. And it's doing very well. We're building our next 2 commercial scalable greenhouses that are 62,500 square feet with a vast amount of improvements over our knowledge for the past couple of years. That's what we look to do. We look to bring these kind of solutions to several different markets. So you're talking about research, education, military bases, government entities. Let's see if this video will play for you guys.
I don't hear anything, Aaron.
There's no sound, Aaron.
Oh, I'm sorry, guys. My bad. I apologize. I was hoping that would play over, but that's Eugene Van Buren, one of the brothers, telling a story about how they came to form this. It's a pretty moving story. It's on our website, but that's why they did that. So that's Jacques and Eugene. They've done a lot of good work in hydroponics and learning and promoting things. They can build anything for me. Some other facts about the industry and where we stand and what we try to improve from Eden Green. These are all very well researched stats. We have the CEO of our company actually started and ran. He started and ran a global media company, social media company, marketing company, and so he gets a lot of good information and knows how to put it together for us. I'll get you guys these slides later. So some numbers on our production. Really good numbers. These are all legit. I'll vouch for them. I've practiced this and I've done my work to make sure that this is how we get to where we are. So in our 1 acre greenhouse in Cleburne, that's 189,000 plant spots, give or take. And that's on 1 acre. So if I were to spread that out, it's over 10 times acreage on 1 acre that we can do certain, like all leafy greens and herb crops for sure. And so it's a vast improvement for production over the footprint.
Now, Aaron, that's 10 to 1 for 1 cycle.
I'm not going to say that because it varies. I don't like to get plugged into that number, but if you know about lettuce and field production, you're going to get somewhere between 35 and 60,000 lettuce plants on 1 acre that you can harvest 3 times a year in a place like Yuma, leafy greens. So we've squeezed in 189,000 plant spots in that 1 acre, and we can harvest it 11 to 13 times a year.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. It's not 10 to 1. It's a lot more.
It's a lot more than that. You're absolutely right. Yeah, but that is true. Those numbers are legit, and I've done what I can to make sure that that works. So this is kind of how that system works. We have these vines, that's the gray part, and we have a plant spot in a cup right there. That plant spot delivers nutrients 24/7 in pH balance, nutrient infused, temperature controlled water. It's a cascade, a gravity fed NFT, vertical NFT system. As it cascades, it actually adds DO to our water. Typical NFT systems will take away DO as they run down. We used an accelerated flow rate to help us do that. Our temperature control also adds to the biome around that plant. The other aspect of this is that we have microclimate technology that allows us to feed CO2 temperature and humidity controlled air directly to each plant spot. And so we actually create a bubble around our plants that is a dynamic bubble so as not to stunt the plant. And we keep all that air usually at lettuce set points. So 55 to 60% humidity, up to 70. The temperature is 75 during the day, give or take, and 65 at night for those 4 hours. It responds on a dime. We have a great system that we, had a learning curve and had to work out some kinks with, but we've brought several industries together to help us find solutions, and we continue to do that as much as possible. Here's our team. Eddie Badrina, our CEO, is a graduate of A&M. And then Jacques and Eugene, and then myself plugged in there. We have a great marketing director who I said did this, and a great CFO and COO that are not listed here. That do great work. We're all very busy and we all wear a lot of hats, and we all believe in this very much so. Hoping to help solve food desert problems and distribution problems across the country. So real quick on how we work, assess, build, train. So we will do what we can to solve your problem. We will build a greenhouse with our system and all implements, and then what you want us to do after that is our plan. You want us to stay and manage the entire thing, we'll do that. You want us to teach you how to manage it and walk away, we'll do that. You want us to build it and walk away, we can do that. We offer remote management and guidance to be plugged in or not plugged in. You would be working directly with me and my team if you need the solution solved. And so we have clients all over the world right now and in the United States that we are working with all at one time. So it's very busy. As we've just started promoting this hardcore in the last 6 months, there's a lot of interest here.
And what's the smallest system you built?
Right
1
now,
acre?
good question. Thank you. Yeah, right now the smallest footprint that we can actually work on profitably for a commercial greenhouse is 62,500 square feet. And that's going to be about 330,000 plant spots. We are vigorously working to get some smaller models out profitably, but there are a lot of universities, education and research people that are very interested in things that may not be necessarily profitable, but can gain, because we can speed things up and grow a lot more plants, and there's a lot of studies you can do with this. So there's a lot of interest there, and that's driven us to create a lot smaller systems, and Jacques and Eugene are working right now very vigorously to make that feasible for people, so we can get it down to like a 10,000 square foot model if we need to. Any questions on that? And do we want to run through the greenhouse real quick?
Oh, there's a question from
Maybe
Tristan.
Yeah.
Do you run the nutrient solution continuously or intermittently?
Yep, we do. I've done dry hydroponics in the past. Right now we run continuously. That really helps because simply put, I have a giant radiator. All those vines act as radiator coils, and they help heat up and maintain temperature in my greenhouse because we don't have a technical heating system, so to speak. But we constantly run it because it is helping with our DO levels, and because we can manage temperature. In another system, you may not want to do that. But that cup that our plant grows in also offers about 60% of open air space to allow for air roots and water roots. So we don't have to worry about drowning our plants with our water.
The solution is temperature controller, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Another question, how does the labor cost for harvest? Do you do any automation harvest?
No, we don't do any automated harvesting right now. We want to. That's definitely one of our goals. Automated harvesting and automated scouting. Right now, it's always scissor lifts. But at this point in time, for labor costs, just to give you an idea, I have we are harvesting roughly 25,000 plants a week with a production team of 6 or 7 people. And so once and that's protocol and SOPs and trial and error that lets us do that. And then we can do much better, we think, with some automation.
Another question, what was the canopy research quoted earlier?
Oh, sorry. I'd have to find the actual thing. I picked this up in a technical class with Dr. Cherry Kubota, who works at the Ohio State University, and she's done a lot of research with this. But the theory basically states that you can overlight one plant, but the minute you have a canopy effect, that light is diffused so much through the layers of the canopy that you can't ever give it too much light as a group. I don't know the exact name of that. I want to say it's the canopy effect and light filtration, but that's essentially how that goes. They used to think that you could overlight, and now they don't believe that anymore. Cool. Any other questions? Good. It's completely up to the group and you doctors whether or not you'd like me to run through the greenhouse. I can probably do that in about 15 minutes if anyone wants to see it. If
yes,
not,
please. Yes,
sure.
please. So you need a break. You need to disconnect and then
I need
join
about
again
5 minutes,
on the phone.
Yeah. You have to jump on my phone, and then me and my associate will run through the greenhouse with you guys real quick.
All right. So how about we give everybody 20 minutes? We give you time to do.
Sure, yeah.
Is that too much or too little?
But yeah, we can probably do this in 15, to be honest with you.
Okay, 15 minutes. So
Yeah.
let's join at what, 4:05?
4:05 sounds great.
Okay.
All right, thank you. See you all soon. You really only need about 1 meter per second or less to grow good plants. You don't want to be too vigorous, or you can actually upset their airflow. This is our last zone that doesn't have lights in it right now. So you'll see some discrepancy down the line in size. It's a great proof of what light does and doesn't do to plants. And you will not have nearly the development on that end, which is the north end, as you will on the south end. And we just took a great picture of this that I think we were going to post online of the development with and without light. But as we move forward, you're going to go into our lighted zone.
You'll see the light. I'll try to see if I can get some glasses here. These are the GE Arise fixtures. These first 2 rows we walk down, that's the reproductive red spectrum. As you can see, we have some butterhead plants here that we're trying to keep open in their production. We also do romaines and spinaches under these lights. They really like that. And then you'll see the different heights, as I talked about, where we did them up top and have since moved them down a level here to try to use that sunlight a little more at the top and get more toward the bottom. This zone is 20 rows of production. Right now we're harvesting 5 rows a week. We'll move to 3 rows a week because we're putting that herb trial in. That's going to stay in for quite a while as part of our practice. We do green oak and red oak regularly because it does really well in our system and it gives us good numbers and feedback. You can see here as it sits in the cup what kind of root development you get. If it works really well, you'll get some air roots developing on this outside and some water roots developing down the back end of that plant. And so that's kind of what we're hoping for, is that cup allows for the water to flow down one end, but still allows for that gas and air exchange on the other end. These guys, we just harvested this week already, so you're seeing some plants that may come out next week or the week after. Again, we're 28 days in system, and then we'll replant once again and start all over. We got some glasses. So if any of you have worked around LEDs, you can know that they will they can give you headaches and they can bother your eyes. So we get glasses. They're not cheap, but they're worth every penny. What they do is they neutralize that pink light, and so it helps when you're diagnosing or scouting. It also helps just for checking plants, and it makes you not have headaches when you're working in these plants for these aisles for too long. I'm going to see if this works. You'll have to let me know. Let's try this, Bryson. Okay, so yep. Okay. Yeah, switch it there. I don't know if you guys can see that difference or not. It translates.
Get it as close as possible to the lens so it does not reflect. Like that. Yeah, or close. Yeah, close.
You should be able to see the individual diodes in the light.
No, it is still reddish. It is still reddish. It's still, so it looks like the eye is different than the lens.
Yeah, that would make sense. But yeah, they do an amazing job. You'll see things with and without those glasses that you wouldn't normally see. And it's required for all of our workers that work in these aisles, and you need it when you scout also. Let's walk down this aisle, Bryson. So this is the south end of the greenhouse, so it does get warmer and brighter. As you move down an aisle, you'll immediately feel the air. It's calm, the movement, the plant growth. It's a very serene, tranquil environment. You can see how we've harvested the bottom of this row here, and we'll harvest the top tomorrow. It's mustard greens and cilantro. Usually, like I said, we harvest about 15 rows a week, give or take. So it's great production on minimal staff. We do get up on scissor lifts. We have one set of sensors that control that microclimate I talked about. So they're constantly monitoring the water temp, the CO2, the temperature of the air, the humidity of the air, and all the things around the plant canopy. We have another set of sensors that monitors our ambient environment. One of the goals to improve the efficiency of greenhouse production, one of the goals of Eden Green, is to make sure that we put all of our energy into the most pertinent use possible right at that plant spot. I don't need to heat and control a cubic acre of airspace. I just have to worry about the microclimate around my plants. I have to be very aware of how that microclimate reacts with my ambient air so that I know when to open my vents yet and still use that greenhouse. But for the most part, all of our energy and resource goes into just the plants, making it more specific to each individual plant. We're going to walk by our fertigation system real quick just so you guys see what we use, because we talked about that today. It's a little loud, so bear with me. What you see here is a Fertimix system. This is from Horticulture. We have valves down here at the bottom. Each valve is a feed valve and a return valve to all of our tanks, which are buried underground outside. It's going to pull the water in from that tank. It's going to feed it into that fertigation system, that blue box. It's going to read the pH and EC at 2 different points. And then it's going to dose with solenoid valves as it sees fit, either just acid or acid and fertilizer. The tanks over to the left here, those are our stock tanks. We can use as many as 8. Right now we employ 5 that we can mix 5 different nutrients in. And then I can feed those in different ratios to each individual zone if my plants need that. Let's go this way.
I have a question. Aaron.
This is our return air system here. It feeds into our HVAC system. So we have louvers at the bottom and the top here that are constantly turning over somewhere between 8 and 15,000 CFM. That helps us manage the ambient air and push the correct air back out to the plant spots at the right set points. That's all monitored real time. The data is all logged, and you can control that from any internet interface. We're walking back through zone D right now, which is our lit zone. We're on the north end of the greenhouse now. We get very consistent results from north to south, which was another reason we put lights in. And we don't see a lot of temperature variance either with our microclimate control. The last system that we have that I didn't talk about earlier, system of our food safety program, but it works for people and plants. We have 6 industrial black light bulbs right there, UV light bulbs, that we run all of our tanks through 24/7. That's going to kill 99% of the bacteria in our water. This does 2 benefits, in my opinion. Number 1, it's going to kill anything like a listeria or an E. coli. And we can test before and after. And we do those tests quarterly and sometimes monthly per our food safety program. We've never had an issue at Eden Green. But the other thing that it does is because we're hydroponic and we use inorganic material to grow in sometimes, we have to add things like trichoderma and bacillus to our root zone to enhance the biology of that root zone and improve our feeding and the protection of our roots. So if I do that and I need to add something to clean my lines out, like a PAA or a chlorine or anything like that, it's also going to kill the good microbes in my plant spots. By treating that water away from the plant spot at the source here, I can actually help keep that root zone healthy and biotic and still kill all the bad stuff by flushing it through. These are expensive systems. They really only scale with commercial greenhouses. We have 2 in our greenhouse. They run 24/7 and they clean themselves. They're pretty autonomous. We just have to check the sand filters once every 8 months. We'll walk back here to where we started this morning, or this afternoon. That's the short and sweet of the whole greenhouse here at Eden Green. I'm glad we got to walk through. I'm glad that you guys got to be part of my presentation today. I thank you again for allowing me to be off schedule, so to speak. And I apologize for any inconvenience, but I'm glad that I got to do this. I've been looking forward to this. I love what Dr. Masabni and Dr. New are doing there, and I think this does a lot to speak for both this region in Texas and the country for collaboration. I'm open to any questions. My email is aaron@edengreen.com. I'm on LinkedIn. My profile is Aaron Mark Fields. And you can reach out to our website at edengreen.com also for other information or questions or even interest in sales. We're expanding, we're growing, and we're excited about what we're doing here. And I will do my best to get PFDs of these slides to everyone available through the professors.
Okay, I have a question.
Anything else I can do for you?
There's a question, Aaron, from Eric. UV filtration question. Have you had any trouble with precipitation of iron? I remember that it messes up the interaction with the chelator and the redox state, but maybe that has been solved somehow.
It has been solved, and that's a great question. Basically, by using the right amount of iron, and since iron is only at about 3 to 5 ppm in our system, depending, there's not enough to cause that precipitate when we just do this flash point, source point UV treatment. If you were to treat it in the solution or in the stock tank or maybe closer or at a larger volume at one time, I could see that being an issue, but we do not have that problem.
Well, you've been getting a lot of thank yous and fantastic
Good.
job, and thank you again. And what is needed to schedule a tour? You offered the tour. I guess they email you and schedule something with you.
Yeah, anything that we can do to help, either virtually or in person. Obviously, the pandemic has us slowed down, but we like to do a lot of things like this, especially for education purposes or obviously for sales purposes. I would reach out at info@edengreen.com, or you can email me and tell me that you were part of this, and I'll get you to the right person.
Now, as you mentioned that you are in the business of selling the system, but so you're not selling any produce at all?
No, and thanks for segueing into that. I forgot about that earlier. We donate 100% of everything we grow here. And so local food banks, local charities, we drive down to Houston every 2 weeks and work with a company, an organization called Spring Spirit. We donate to the Oak Cliff Project in South Dallas, to a food desert down there, and numerous amounts of local charities. So we need the data. We're a data company and a technology company. In order to get that data, we have to grow plants. So I have to know what I'm doing to get good data, but it also gives us good product to give away. And when we're at the end of the day, we're really just about helping people get nutritious food anywhere that we can grow.
Very commendable. Thank you very much. Thank you again. And I apologize for the confusion between the third and the fourth, but I'm glad it all worked out. And I tell you so many thank yous and a wonderful job and all that. So I hope we can be able to repay you the favor. If you need anything from us, just let us know.
I always will. I hope to get out there and see you guys on site again and work with you and everybody else that's involved to help improve things. Thanks a lot, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.